The cruelest kind of betrayal is the one signed with a smile. Vanessa Cole realized that at exactly 11:43 p.m. on the night of her 8th wedding anniversary, rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their downtown Chicago penthouse while candles burned low across the dining table she had spent 3 hours preparing. The steak had gone cold almost an hour earlier. Ryan Whitmore still wasn't home. At first, she told herself he was stuck in another late executive meeting at Blackstone Grand Hotel. Ryan always had an excuse lately. Another investor dinner. Another emergency conference call. Another client crisis. But then Vanessa noticed something strange. His expensive navy suitcase was missing from the bedroom closet. So were half his tailored suits. Her stomach tightened as she grabbed her phone and called him for the 4th time. Straight to voicemail. A cold silence filled the apartment. Then her email notification chimed. One message. One attachment. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a debt transfer agreement. Over $480,000 in failed business liabilities had been legally reassigned entirely into her name only 3 hours earlier. At the bottom of the final page sat Ryan's digital signature beside hers. Except Vanessa had never signed anything. Her heartbeat slowed in disbelief as another notification appeared. Their joint checking account had been emptied. Their savings account was closed. The penthouse lease had been terminated effective immediately. Vanessa stared at the city skyline through blurred eyes while thunder rolled above Chicago. Then finally her phone buzzed. A text message from Ryan. I'm sorry. This was the only way. That was it. No explanation. No goodbye. 8 years together reduced to one sentence. Vanessa called him again instantly. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. 15 minutes later, someone knocked on the penthouse door. Not Ryan. 2 men in gray suits stood there holding legal documents. The bank had already begun asset recovery proceedings. Vanessa felt humiliation burn through her chest as they politely informed her she had until morning to vacate the property. One of them avoided eye contact when he noticed the anniversary candles still lit behind her. Around midnight, Vanessa sat alone on the hardwood floor surrounded by unopened bills she never knew existed. Credit cards, business loans, personal guarantees. Ryan had buried everything beneath her name while protecting his own reputation at Blackstone Grand. She remembered every night he kissed her forehead and promised they were building a future together. Every conversation about loyalty. Every promise about forever. Outside, Chicago traffic glowed beneath the rain while luxury cars moved through streets that suddenly felt very far away from her life. Vanessa wiped her tears before they could fall completely. Something inside her had gone strangely calm. Not healed. Not okay. Just empty. Then her phone rang again unexpectedly. Unknown number. Vanessa answered quietly. A woman's voice spoke on the other end. Miss Cole, this is First National Recovery Services. We need to discuss immediate repayment options regarding your outstanding debt. Vanessa closed her eyes slowly as thunder echoed above the city. In less than 1 hour, she had lost her husband, her home, her savings, and her name. But somewhere deep beneath the shock and humiliation, another feeling quietly began to grow. Ryan Whitmore thought he had escaped the wreckage. He had no idea he had just created the woman who would one day own the building he worshipped most. Nothing destroys a person faster than being erased while they are still alive. 3 weeks after losing everything, Vanessa Cole stood in the freezing Chicago wind outside Blackstone Grand Hotel, wearing a borrowed gray coat that was 2 sizes too big for her. Snow drifted across Michigan Avenue while luxury SUVs lined the entrance beneath glowing gold lights. Wealthy guests stepped onto the red carpet laughing beneath umbrellas held by hotel staff, who treated them like royalty. Vanessa lowered her eyes and tightened her grip around the paper takeout bag in her hands. Inside was a lobster pasta dinner worth $90 that she had spent nearly 2 hours delivering through a food app in order to make enough money to keep the lights on in. Her tiny studio apartment. Except the customer who ordered it never answered the door. She had called 6 times. No response. The delivery app refused to reimburse her unless she returned the order personally. Vanessa walked carefully through the revolving doors of Blackstone Grand, trying not to draw attention to herself. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the marble lobby, while piano music drifted softly through the air. The scent of expensive perfume and polished wood filled the space. For a brief second, Vanessa remembered when places like this used to feel normal. Back when Ryan promised they would someday own something this beautiful together. She quickly pushed the thought away. At the concierge desk, Vanessa explained quietly that she needed help locating the guest connected to the order. The young employee barely looked at her before asking her to step aside. A few nearby guests glanced toward Vanessa with the kind of expression wealthy people used when pretending not to stare. 10 uncomfortable minutes passed. Then another hotel employee approached with visible irritation. Ma'am, if the guest is not responding, you need to leave the property. Vanessa tried to explain again, but before she could finish, the employee reached for the takeout bag and accidentally dropped it onto the marble floor. The container burst open instantly. Pasta and sauce splattered across the polished lobby beneath the massive chandelier. Conversations nearby suddenly stopped. Vanessa froze in humiliation as dozens of eyes turned toward her. You cannot make this kind of mess in here. The employee snapped loudly. You need to go. Vanessa bent down immediately, trying to clean the floor with trembling hands while people whispered around her. Then she heard a familiar voice behind her. Calm, polished, controlled. What is happening here? Her entire body went still. Ryan Whitmore stepped into the lobby wearing a tailored black suit with a silver Blackstone management badge clipped near his jacket pocket. He looked exactly the same. Same sharp jawline. Same perfect hair. Same confident posture that once made her feel safe. But the warmth in his eyes was gone. Ryan glanced down at Vanessa kneeling on the marble floor beside spilled pasta before looking toward the staff member. Handle this quietly, he said. Vanessa slowly stood up holding the ruined paper bag against her chest. For one painful second, their eyes locked. Ryan absolutely recognized her. She saw it instantly. The flicker of panic. The guilt. The memory. But then something colder replaced it. Professional distance. Like she was just another stranger causing inconvenience inside his hotel. Ryan reached into his wallet and handed the employee several $100 bills. Cover the cleaning costs and comp the lobby guests' dessert tonight. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Not because he paid for the mess. Because he never once asked if she was okay. Ryan turned toward her one final time. His voice remained smooth and emotionless. Ma'am, I think it would be best if you leave now. The lobby fell completely silent. And in that moment, Vanessa realized losing her marriage had not been the most painful part. The most painful part was discovering how easily Ryan Whitmore could look directly at the woman he once loved and pretend she no longer existed. Sometimes the people who survive the hardest storms become dangerous because they stop fearing the rain. For months after the night at Blackstone Grand, Vanessa Cole no longer recognized the woman she used to be. The polished luxury life Ryan once promised her had been replaced by 12-hour shifts, cheap instant coffee, and a tiny roadside motel nearly 40 miles outside Chicago called Maple Crest Inn. The motel sat beside a quiet highway where exhausted truck drivers and struggling travelers stopped for one night before disappearing again by sunrise. The neon vacancy sign flickered constantly, and the faded carpets smelled faintly like old detergent no matter how much Vanessa cleaned them. But unlike the city, this place did not ask questions. The elderly owner, Mrs. Delgado, hired Vanessa because she noticed something unusual during the interview. Vanessa never complained. She never begged for sympathy. She simply asked for work. So every night from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning, Vanessa stood behind the old front desk greeting tired guests with a calm smile while learning every detail about how the motel operated. She learned which booking websites brought the most customers. She learned how to negotiate with laundry suppliers. She learned how to fix reservation mistakes before angry guests demanded refunds. She even taught herself how to repair the ancient coffee machines after maintenance workers stopped answering calls. Slowly, the motel began improving. Customer complaints dropped. Ratings online climbed higher. Repeat guests started asking specifically for the woman with the warm voice at the front desk. Mrs. Delgado noticed everything. One snowy Thursday evening, the motel faced its worst crisis in years. A pipe burst beneath the second floor just as every room became fully booked because of a highway snowstorm. Water leaked through the ceiling while frustrated travelers crowded the lobby demanding refunds. Mrs. Delgado panicked immediately. We are finished, she whispered while staring at the overflowing lobby. But Vanessa remained strangely calm. She grabbed a notebook and started reorganizing rooms manually. She called nearby hardware stores until she found emergency plumbing supplies. She offered exhausted families free coffee and extra blankets while personally helping move luggage through the freezing weather. Then she convinced a nearby diner owner to temporarily partner with the motel for discounted meals in exchange for future business referrals. By midnight, the lobby had transformed completely. Guests who arrived angry were suddenly thanking her instead. One elderly truck driver shook his head in disbelief while sipping coffee near the fireplace. You run this place better than half the hotels downtown, he said. Vanessa smiled politely but said nothing. She had learned something important recently. Silence protected dignity better than explaining pain ever could. Around 1 in the morning, a black luxury sedan pulled quietly into the parking lot covered in snow. Vanessa barely noticed at first. Wealthy travelers almost never stopped at Maple Crest Inn. An older man stepped slowly into the lobby wearing a charcoal wool coat and leather gloves. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere without him saying a single word. He watched Vanessa calmly directing employees and comforting frustrated guests with remarkable composure. Then he glanced toward the soaked ceiling, the packed lobby, and the exhausted staff somehow still functioning smoothly. Interesting, he murmured quietly to himself. Vanessa approached with her professional smile despite being completely exhausted. Good evening, sir. I apologize for the chaos tonight. We only have one room left available. The older man studied her carefully for several seconds before speaking again. Young lady, he said softly. Do you own this motel? Vanessa almost laughed at the question. No, sir, she answered honestly. I just work here. The man slowly removed his gloves while continuing to observe the organized lobby around her. Then a faint smile crossed his face. That, he replied quietly, might be the biggest mistake this place has ever made. Success usually arrives disguised as the moment you almost gave up. Vanessa Cole did not learn the older man's identity until 3 days later. By then, the snowstorm had passed, the burst pipe had finally been repaired, and Maple Creston was somehow receiving better online reviews than it had in almost a decade. Vanessa was sitting alone behind the front desk reviewing inventory receipts when the black luxury sedan returned just after sunrise. The same older man stepped out wearing another perfectly tailored coat, while snow melted quietly along the roadside outside. This time, he carried no luggage, only a slim leather folder beneath his arm. Mrs. Delgado nearly dropped a stack of towels when she saw him walk through the lobby. Her face lost all color instantly. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. Vanessa looked confused until Mrs. Delgado leaned closer and spoke softly. "That is Charles Sterling." The name meant nothing to Vanessa at first. Then realization slowly hit her. Sterling Crown Hotels, one of the largest luxury hospitality companies in America. More than 70 properties across the country. Billion-dollar resorts in Miami, Aspen, and Beverly Hills. Vanessa immediately stood up, embarrassed that she had treated him like an ordinary guest days earlier. But Charles Sterling only smiled calmly as he approached the desk. "Miss Cole," he said warmly. "I was hoping you would be here." Vanessa nodded politely while trying to remain professional. "Good morning, sir." Charles glanced around the modest lobby before speaking again. "I spent 40 years building hotels, and I can usually tell within 5 minutes who understands hospitality and who only understands money." Vanessa remained silent. "Most people think this business is about luxury," Charles continued. "It is not. It is about making strangers feel safe." He slowly placed the leather folder onto the counter between them. Inside were financial reports, occupancy charts, customer satisfaction data, and several photographs of an aging hotel in downtown Milwaukee. "One of my properties is failing," he explained. "Terrible management, terrible morale, terrible customer retention. I have replaced executives 3 times in 2 years." Vanessa glanced through the reports carefully. Even exhausted from overnight work, her eyes immediately noticed patterns. Overspending in the wrong departments. Poor employee scheduling. High-value guests receiving inconsistent service. "Your front desk turnover is destroying guest loyalty," she said instinctively before stopping herself. Charles smiled slightly. "Exactly." Vanessa slowly closed the folder. "Sir, with respect, I have no business advising someone like you." Charles leaned against the counter comfortably. "Really?" he asked. "Because 4 nights ago I watched you stabilize a collapsing motel during a snow emergency without panicking once." Vanessa lowered her eyes. She still was not used to being seen that clearly. Charles studied her expression carefully before speaking again. "Someone taught you to doubt your own value." The words landed harder than Vanessa expected. For a moment, she thought about Ryan standing in the Blackstone Grand lobby pretending not to know her. She thought about the debt collectors, the eviction notices, the humiliation. Charles opened the folder again and slid a business card toward her. "Come to Milwaukee tomorrow morning," he said calmly. 3 days. That is all I am asking for. If you fail, you can walk away." Vanessa stared at the card in silence. Sterling Crown Executive Headquarters. A private phone number was handwritten beneath the logo. "Why me?" she finally asked quietly. Charles looked toward the motel lobby where a tired truck driver had just entered carrying snow on his boots. Before the man even reached the desk, Vanessa instinctively grabbed fresh coffee and handed it to him with a warm smile. The exhausted driver's entire face relaxed immediately. Charles watched the interaction carefully before answering. Because the people who have suffered the most usually understand service better than the people born into comfort. Then he adjusted his gloves and headed toward the exit. But before leaving, he paused near the door and turned back toward Vanessa one final time. "And because," he added quietly, "the woman who ruined my competitors would be much more interesting working for me instead." The most powerful revenge is becoming impossible to ignore. Vanessa Cole arrived in Milwaukee with 1 suitcase, a winter coat, and exactly $86 left in her checking account. The Sterling Crown property Charles Sterling wanted her to evaluate stood in the middle of downtown like a forgotten memory from another era. Once famous for elegance and celebrity guests, the Grand Meridian Hotel now looked exhausted. Half the exterior lights no longer worked. The lobby plants were dying. Guests walked past the front desk without being greeted, while frustrated employees whispered complaints behind forced smiles. Vanessa noticed everything within the first 10 minutes. She noticed the bartender serving drinks with visible irritation. She noticed housekeeping carts blocking hallways during peak check-in hours. She noticed exhausted staff members covering multiple positions because management kept cutting labor costs to impress investors. But most importantly, Vanessa noticed fear. Everyone inside the hotel looked afraid of making mistakes. Charles Sterling gave her complete access for 72 hours. No title, no authority, just observation. By the end of the first day, Vanessa filled an entire notebook with problems nobody else seemed willing to acknowledge. On the second morning, she quietly approached a front desk employee named Lily who looked moments away from tears after being screamed at by a guest over a reservation error. Instead of blaming her, Vanessa asked one simple question. Did anyone ever train you properly? Lily stared at her silently before shaking her head. That answer explained almost everything. Vanessa spent the next 2 days doing something the hotel executives never bothered doing. She listened. She listened to exhausted housekeepers. She listened to kitchen staff. She listened to frustrated guests. She listened to employees who had stopped caring because nobody in leadership cared about them first. Then, on the final afternoon, Charles Sterling invited Vanessa into the executive boardroom overlooking downtown Milwaukee. 5 senior executives sat around the polished table already prepared to dismiss her. Vanessa could feel their skepticism immediately. One of them even glanced at her old coat before smirking quietly. Charles remained calm at the head of the table. "Miss Cole," he said, "tell them what you told me." Vanessa slowly placed her notebook onto the table. For the next 40 minutes, the room became completely silent. She explained how the hotel was losing repeat guests because staff morale had collapsed. She explained why cutting breakfast quality to save $12,000 monthly was costing hundreds of thousands in long-term customer loyalty. She explained that luxury guests remembered emotional experiences more than marble floors or expensive chandeliers. One executive interrupted her impatiently. "And where exactly did you learn all this?" Vanessa looked directly at him without flinching. "At a roadside motel where people could barely afford a room for the night," she answered calmly. The room went quiet again. Charles Sterling leaned back slowly while watching the executives absorb every word. Then Vanessa delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Your problem is not that this hotel lacks money," she said quietly. "Your problem is that everyone here stopped making people feel welcome." Even Charles smiled slightly at that. 2 hours later, Vanessa stood alone near the massive windows overlooking Milwaukee River while snow drifted softly outside. She expected Charles to thank her politely and send her back to Chicago. Instead, he handed her a contract folder. Vanessa frowned in confusion as she opened it. The offer nearly made her stop breathing. Interim operations consultant. Full salary. Housing included. Performance equity incentives tied directly to hotel recovery profits. Vanessa looked up immediately. "Sir, this has to be a mistake." Charles shook his head once. "No, Miss Cole," he replied calmly. "The mistake was allowing someone like you to almost disappear." Vanessa stared at the contract while emotions battled silently behind her composed expression. Less than a year earlier, she had been sitting on the floor of an empty apartment surrounded by debt notices. Now one of the most powerful men in hospitality was offering her a future she never imagined possible. But somewhere deep inside, another thought quietly surfaced. Ryan Whitmore still believed he had buried her beneath the ruins of her old life. He had absolutely no idea what was beginning. Some people disappear quietly. Others disappear long enough to return unrecognizable. 4 years later, Blackstone Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago prepared for the largest acquisition celebration in company history. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the massive ballroom while executives, investors, and reporters gathered beneath gold lighting and live violin music. Champagne glasses moved through the crowd on silver trays while cameras flashed near the entrance. Rumors about the mysterious buyer had dominated the hospitality industry for weeks. Nobody knew much except one detail. The investor behind the acquisition had enough power to purchase not only Blackstone Grand, but several competing luxury properties across the Midwest as well. Ryan Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks confidently near the ballroom entrance while greeting important guests with the polished charm he had perfected over the years. At 39 years old, Ryan had climbed higher inside Blackstone than he ever imagined possible. Senior Regional Operations Director. 6-figure bonuses. Magazine interviews. A luxury condo overlooking Lake Michigan. From the outside, his life looked flawless. But hidden beneath the expensive suits and executive titles was a constant fear he never fully escaped. Every once in a while, usually late at night after too much whiskey, Ryan still thought about Vanessa. Not with guilt exactly. More like discomfort. Like a problem he convinced himself had already disappeared. He had not heard her name in years. No social media. No mutual friends mentioning her. Nothing. Eventually, Ryan stopped wondering what happened to her because successful people rarely looked backward for long. Tonight, however, his focus remained entirely on impressing the incoming ownership group. If he handled the transition correctly, promotion rumors could finally become reality. Near the ballroom stage, Blackstone executives gathered nervously while reporters whispered among themselves. "Do we know who the buyer actually is?" One investor asked quietly. "Private equity, supposedly," another answered. "Nobody has even seen her publicly before." Ryan barely paid attention while checking final event details on his phone. Then suddenly, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly near the entrance. Conversations softened. One by one, heads began turning toward the front doors. Ryan looked up instinctively, and for the first time in 4 years, his entire body went cold. Vanessa Cole stepped into the ballroom wearing an elegant black evening gown beneath a long-tailored ivory coat draped softly over her shoulders. Diamond earrings reflected the chandelier light as she moved calmly through the crowd with quiet confidence. Her posture was graceful, controlled, untouchable. Gone was the exhausted woman kneeling on the marble floor beside spilled pasta inside this same hotel years earlier. This woman looked like she belonged in every room powerful people feared losing access to. Behind her walked Charles Sterling alongside several high-profile investors Ryan immediately recognized from hospitality magazines and financial news interviews. The ballroom became almost completely silent. Ryan stared at Vanessa in disbelief while memories crashed into him all at once. The anniversary dinner, the debt papers, the lobby humiliation, the voicemail he never returned. Vanessa finally stopped near the center of the ballroom as executives hurried nervously toward her. Someone whispered, "That is Vanessa Cole." Another voice answered softly, "She owns Sterling Crown now." Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. Owns. Not works for. Owns. Charles Sterling approached the stage microphone with a proud smile, while cameras flashed rapidly across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced smoothly, "allow me to officially introduce the new majority owner of Blackstone Grand Hospitality Group, Miss Vanessa Cole." Applause slowly erupted throughout the ballroom, but Ryan could barely hear any of it. Vanessa accepted the attention with calm composure before finally lifting her eyes toward him across the crowded room. Their gaze locked for one long, devastating moment. Ryan expected anger, satisfaction, revenge. Instead, Vanessa looked at him the same way wealthy people looked at old buildings they no longer planned to keep. Polite, distant, unmoved. Then she turned away from him completely and walked toward the stage while the entire ballroom rose to its feet around her. The hardest thing for a proud man to survive is becoming invisible to the person he once controlled. Ryan Whitmore barely slept after the acquisition gala. By sunrise, every major business publication in Chicago featured Vanessa Cole on the front page beside headlines about the historic Sterling Crown takeover. Reporters called her one of the most influential new figures in luxury hospitality. Financial analysts praised her rapid rise through Sterling Crown leadership over the past 4 years. Ryan sat alone inside his corner office at Blackstone Grand scrolling through article after article, while a pressure he could not explain tightened inside his chest. He kept replaying the moment Vanessa looked at him across the ballroom. Not angry, not emotional. Worse, indifferent. By mid-morning, rumors spread throughout the hotel faster than wildfire. Employees whispered in elevators. Executives suddenly acted nervous around long-term contracts and expense reports. Everyone understood one thing clearly. Vanessa Cole now controlled everything. Around noon, Ryan received a message from executive administration requesting his presence in the top-floor conference suite. The meeting invite contained only 3 words. Ownership, transition review. Ryan adjusted his tie carefully before entering the private conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. The room fell quiet the second he walked in. Several Sterling Crown executives sat reviewing documents along one side of the polished table. Charles Sterling stood near the windows speaking softly with investors. And at the head of the table sat Vanessa. She wore a cream-colored tailored suit with gold buttons and simple diamond earrings. No dramatic expression, no visible satisfaction. She looked calm, professional, untouchably composed. Ryan suddenly became painfully aware that she now belonged to a world far beyond his reach. Vanessa glanced up briefly as he entered. "Mr. Whitmore," she said smoothly, "please have a seat." Her voice carried absolutely no trace of their past together. That somehow hurt more than anger would have. Ryan sat down slowly while trying to maintain executive composure. Vanessa continued reviewing paperwork for several seconds before finally speaking again. "Your regional performance reports over the last 3 fiscal years are strong," she said calmly. Guest retention metrics at Blackstone Grand exceeded expectations. Ryan blinked in confusion. He expected confrontation, questions, accusations. Instead, Vanessa discussed his work performance like he was any other executive employee beneath her organization. Charles Sterling quietly observed everything without interruption. Ryan cleared his throat carefully. "Vanessa." She immediately looked up from the documents. "In this room, it is Miss Cole," she corrected politely. Silence settled heavily across the conference suite. Ryan felt heat rise in his face while several executives avoided eye contact. Vanessa continued speaking as if nothing uncomfortable had happened. "At this time, Sterling Crown intends to retain existing operational leadership during the transition process." Ryan stared at her. "You are not firing me." Vanessa closed the folder slowly before meeting his eyes directly. "No, Mr. Whitmore," she answered calmly. "Your position remains intact." The response should have relieved him. Instead, something about it unsettled him deeply. Vanessa was not punishing him. She was placing him exactly where he used to place her, beneath someone else's power. The meeting continued another 20 minutes discussing budgets, renovations, and staffing structures. Vanessa remained perfectly composed throughout every conversation. She never once referenced their marriage, never mentioned the debt, never acknowledged the years he erased her from his life. And somehow that silence became unbearable. As executives slowly exited the room afterward, Ryan finally approached her privately near the windows overlooking the city skyline. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Vanessa turned toward him with controlled calm. "Doing what?" Pretending none of this happened. For the first time all morning, something shifted slightly in her expression. Not pain, not anger, just clarity. Because, Ryan, she said softly, the worst day of my life stopped being about you a very long time ago. Her words landed harder than any public humiliation ever could. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but Vanessa's assistant approached holding another folder. Miss Cole, the audit team is ready whenever you are. Vanessa accepted the documents smoothly without looking away from Ryan. Then she spoke one final sentence that made his stomach drop instantly. Perfect, she said calmly. I would especially like to review the financial transfer records from approximately 4 years ago. People rarely fear the truth itself. They fear the moment the truth becomes public. 3 days after the acquisition meeting, tension inside Blackstone Grand had become impossible to ignore. Executives who once walked confidently through the marble hallways now spoke in whispers behind closed office doors. Internal audit teams from Sterling Crown occupied entire conference floors while financial records from the previous decade were pulled into review. Every employee understood something serious was happening, but nobody knew exactly what. Ryan Whitmore tried maintaining normal routines. He attended meetings, reviewed operational reports, smiled through conversations with investors. But underneath the polished exterior, panic slowly spread through him like poison. Vanessa's final sentence during the transition meeting had not left his mind for even a moment. I would especially like to review the financial transfer records from approximately 4 years ago. Ryan knew exactly which record she meant. And worse, he knew those documents were never supposed to survive. Late Thursday evening, Ryan entered his office to find an official notice waiting on his desk requesting his presence at a closed executive review the following morning. Mandatory attendance. No explanation attached. Ryan barely slept that night. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the executive boardroom overlooking Chicago River felt colder than usual despite the sunlight pouring through the glass walls. Several Sterling Crown attorneys sat beside financial analysts reviewing thick binders filled with audit documents. Charles Sterling remained near the windows with his hands folded calmly behind his back. Vanessa sat at the head of the table dressed in another impeccably tailored suit, her expression unreadable. Ryan immediately noticed one additional person sitting quietly near the far end of the room. Daniel Mercer, former Blackstone financial controller. The same man who disappeared from the company shortly after the debt transfer incident years earlier. Ryan's stomach tightened instantly. Daniel avoided eye contact completely. Vanessa spoke first. Thank you for coming, Mr. Whitmore. Her tone remained professional. Controlled. Please sit. Ryan obeyed slowly while trying to steady his breathing. One Sterling Crown attorney opened a file immediately. During routine acquisition audits, the attorney began. Our team identified several unusual liability transfers connected to Blackstone Grand operations approximately 4 years ago. Ryan forced himself to remain calm. I am not sure what that has to do with me. Vanessa looked toward Daniel Mercer quietly. Mr. Mercer? Daniel swallowed hard before speaking. Ryan instructed me to prepare the transfer documents personally, he admitted softly. The room fell silent. Ryan stared at him in disbelief. That is not true. But Daniel continued speaking anyway. The business debts were attached to shell accounts already collapsing financially. Vanessa Cole's signature authorization was processed without her present. Ryan's face lost color instantly. You signed off on it too, he snapped defensively. Daniel lowered his eyes with visible shame. Yes, he admitted quietly. And I regretted it every day afterward. Vanessa never interrupted once. She simply watched Ryan calmly while the truth unfolded around him piece by piece. One of the attorneys slid several documents across the table. We also recovered archived internal messages connected to the transfer. Ryan recognized the emails immediately before the attorney even finished speaking. Private exchanges, emergency approvals, conversations he believed had been permanently deleted years earlier. Then came the sentence that destroyed whatever control Ryan still had left. The attorney adjusted his glasses before reading aloud from one recovered message. If Vanessa takes the liability, the bank will leave my executive profile untouched long enough for the promotion review. Silence consumed the room completely. Ryan looked toward Vanessa desperately for the first time all morning. I was trying to survive, he said quietly. Vanessa finally spoke again after several long seconds. So was I. Her voice carried no hatred. Somehow that made everything worse. Charles Sterling slowly turned from the windows and looked directly at Ryan with deep disappointment. You sacrificed another human being to protect your reputation, he said calmly. Ryan opened his mouth to defend himself again, but nothing came out. Because for the first time in years, excuses no longer sounded convincing even to him. Vanessa closed the final audit folder gently before standing from her chair. Effective immediately, she said smoothly, Sterling Crown is placing Mr. Whitmore under executive investigation pending termination review. Ryan sat frozen while every person in the room quietly avoided looking at him. And as Vanessa walked calmly toward the door, he finally understood the most painful truth of all. She never destroyed him out of revenge. She simply stopped protecting the man who once destroyed her. The moment someone truly wins is not when their enemy falls. It is when they no longer need revenge to feel whole. 1 week later, The atmosphere inside Blackstone Grand Hotel felt completely different. Sterling Crown executives moved confidently through the building while renovation plans, leadership restructuring, and employee support programs were rolled out floor by floor. Staff members who once looked exhausted now smiled again. Housekeeping schedules became fairer. Front desk workers received proper training. Even the restaurant employees noticed changes immediately after Vanessa approved wage increases and upgraded break areas for overnight staff. For the first time in years, people inside the hotel no longer felt invisible. Ryan Whitmore, however, had become exactly that. The executive investigation concluded faster than expected after additional internal records confirmed his involvement in the fraudulent debt transfer years earlier. His employment contract was terminated quietly to avoid public scandal, but rumors spread through Chicago's hospitality industry within hours anyway. Invitations stopped coming. Recruiters stopped calling. Former colleagues suddenly avoided returning his messages. The same corporate world Ryan once sacrificed everything to protect had erased him almost overnight. Late Friday afternoon, Ryan stood alone inside his nearly empty office packing the last of his belongings into a cardboard box. A framed executive award. A few expensive pens. Several old photographs from company events where he once looked untouchable. Outside the glass walls, employees walked past pretending not to notice him. Ryan paused for a long moment while staring at the skyline beyond Lake Michigan. For years earlier, he believed success meant escaping consequences. Now he finally understood something much worse. Success without integrity eventually leaves a person completely alone. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. Ryan turned slowly, expecting security or another administrator. Instead, Vanessa stood calmly in the doorway. She wore a dark camel coat over a fitted cream dress, her expression composed as always. Ryan looked at her carefully, almost searching for traces of the woman he used to know. But the exhausted, heartbroken Vanessa from years ago no longer existed. This woman carried peace in a way that made her seem untouchable. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ryan glanced down at the cardboard box in his hands and let out a bitter laugh. I guess this is the part where you finally enjoy watching me lose everything. Vanessa studied him quietly before answering. No, Ryan, she said softly. I already survived losing everything. I would not wish that feeling on anyone. Her response hit him harder than anger ever could. Ryan looked away toward the windows. I really did love you once. Vanessa remained silent for a moment before replying. I know. The simplicity of those two words nearly broke him. Ryan swallowed hard. Then why does it feel like you do not hate me at all? Vanessa stepped farther into the office, her heels quiet against the polished floor. Because hate keeps people emotionally attached to the thing that hurt them, she answered calmly. And I spent too many years rebuilding my life to stay attached to my pain. Ryan lowered his eyes slowly. For the first time since the investigation began, he truly understood how far beyond him she had grown. Vanessa glanced once around the office before speaking again. There is a service exit downstairs for departing executives, she said gently. The elevators near the lobby are crowded with reporters. Ryan nodded silently. Years ago, he forced Vanessa to leave this same hotel feeling small, humiliated, and disposable. Now she was protecting what little dignity he still had left. As Ryan picked up the cardboard box and headed toward the door, he stopped beside her one final time. You became everything I was afraid of, he admitted quietly. Vanessa looked at him with calm eyes. No, she answered softly. I became everything you never believed I could survive becoming. Ryan walked away without another word. Minutes later, Vanessa stood alone near the grand lobby balcony overlooking Blackstone Grand. Below her, employees welcomed arriving guests beneath glowing chandeliers, while soft piano music drifted through the air. The hotel no longer felt cold. It finally felt alive again. Vanessa rested one hand lightly against the railing while staring at the massive gold letters recently installed above the marble reception wall. Sterling Crown Hospitality Group. For a brief moment, she remembered the night she stood trembling in the rain after losing her home, her marriage, and her future all at once. Back then, survival itself felt impossible. Now the same woman once discarded like a financial burden owned the building that used to symbolize everything she lost. And somewhere deep inside, Vanessa realized the greatest victory was never the power, the money, or the title. It was becoming someone no betrayal could ever destroy again.